Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was a maintenance technician on Orbital Station Aegis, a modular outpost assembled over many years from American, European, Japanese, and Russian hardware. My job was simple when written on paper and complicated in practice. Keep the life support breathing, keep the electricity flowing, keep the water clean, and fix whatever broke before it killed us. We rotated through checklists for the environmental control and life support system, power buses, attitude control, docking hardware, and the forest of laptops that held the whole place together. I spoke in acronyms during work and in full sentences when I recorded the daily log, because acronyms do not comfort anyone when the numbers go the wrong way. We were 3 months into a long-duration experiment when the outbreak began on Earth. The first clue was not a broadcast or an alert. It was our view. Night passes showed sudden dark patches that should have been lit. Regional power grids winked out like step-down transformers popping along a trunk line. Then the feeds started buffering, then cutting, then switching to test patterns and emergency crawlers. I watched cities I could name by the shape of their streetlights go dim at once. There are no crowds in space and no sirens. There is only the slow rotation of the planet and the pinch in your stomach when a ground voice you recognize fails to answer a routine call. The transmissions we did receive were calm at first, then clipped, then strained. Words like containment, quarantine, and civil response crowded out weather and launch windows. The medical advisory that finally reached us fit inside a short text packet. It described a fast-onset neurological syndrome with aggressive behavior and loss of higher motor control, transmitted by close contact and contaminated fluids. The warning said the pathogen was resilient. It did not say anything about the stars. On Aegis, we lived by procedures. We tightened hatch bolts with the pistol grip torque tool and covered every operation with 2 sets of eyes. We had a carbon dioxide removal assembly that could hiss and cough like an ill animal, but would keep us alive as long as we treated it well. We had oxygen generation through electrolysis and a Sabatier loop that ate carbon dioxide and hydrogen to give us water. We wiped surfaces with iodine and later with silver-based wipes as policies changed. We wore foam earplugs to sleep because fans never stop. We had no policy for watching our world go silent. When the rescue shuttle called us, we did what we always do. We checked the docking ring heaters, checked the latches, and checked that the station's attitude handover to the visiting vehicle would not trip our flight computers. The crew inside the shuttle sounded tired. They had launched with a skeleton team and a cargo compartment reconfigured for evacuees. Their flight director's voice trembled once when she said, "We are bringing up critical personnel." She did not explain critical. She did not have to. We heard what the ground sounded like. We ran the quarantine plan in full. The visiting vehicle would dock to the forward port. We would keep the vestibule sealed while we drew atmospheric samples through the intermodule air sampler, a small pump with a mesh that we loaded like a magazine. We would hold them in the vestibule for 12 hours and monitor vitals remotely. We set up cameras. We set up a medical kit in the pressurized logistics module that we seldom used. We rehearsed the donning of breathing hoods that feed off portable oxygen bottles. We stated the obvious in the brief: space is already a quarantine. If something rides across, it is because we chose to let it. The docking was by the book. The visiting vehicle's approach cone shimmered in the camera as thrusters pulsed. The latches closed, the ring sealed. The 2 pressure vessels became neighbors, divided by a single hatch and a donut of structure. We drew air through the sampler and fed the results into a lab unit that could sense volatile compounds and a handful of biological markers. The readings were unremarkable. The medical lead on their side put a gloved hand against the inner hatch window and gave a thumbs up to our camera. We agreed to start the 12-hour clock. Hour 4. One of the evacuees vomited. On camera, the droplets formed a cloud. In gravity, that would be a mess. In microgravity, that is a threat. The particles did not fall. They drifted and then recirculated when the visiting vehicle's ventilation fan drew them toward its grill. Their medic bagged what he could with wipes and a flexible vacuum at the air intake. He apologized into the microphone. He sounded embarrassed, not afraid. He did not know what we would learn in the days that followed, that in microgravity, droplets do not settle out, and films of moisture cling to any grate and corner until a hand, a sleeve, or a face brushes them free. Hour 8. The same evacuee slept and seemed fine. We argued for the conservative option. We would extend the hold to 24 hours. Their commander accepted with good grace. Everyone floated and waited. In the station proper, we kept busy. Boredom is hazardous on orbit because it makes you rush through checklists. I ran a full inspection on the carbon dioxide removal assembly, checked its zeolite beds, confirmed foam plugs were seated, and logged a slight vibration we had been ignoring. I replaced a cabin air separator pump that had been whining for days. I wiped every handrail I had touched. The habits felt clean. In the middle of our second night on their clock, we lost audio for 20 seconds. When it came back, the visiting vehicle's commander sounded out of breath. He asked for permission to open the vestibule early because one of the passengers was in distress. He said the word seizure. Our flight director on the ground relayed that we were to hold. Medical override did not allow cross-contamination without hard data. The commander's reply was a flat copy. He did not argue. He knew we were right. 5 minutes later, his suit camera showed why he had asked. The evacuee who had vomited had woken confused and then aggressive. He had thrown himself from surface to surface, pushing off with full force and pinwheeling because he had no microgravity training. He had grabbed a crewmate and banged their head into a storage rack. The helmet cam shook. The commander and the medic managed to restrain him with cargo straps and webbing, securing his wrists and knees to an equipment bay handle. The man's eyes were open but unfocused. His mouth opened and closed. There was saliva and the same fine droplets we had seen before. The medic called out blood oxygen saturation numbers that fell too quickly. The commander breathed hard into his mic. Then the feed cut to a wide shot from the hatch camera. They had moved him near the vestibule to give themselves room. They had done what they could. We all went quiet and watched the heartbeat on their medical tablet drift down. The man died before the hour rolled over. We mark the time in station time and visiting vehicle time because that is what we do. We recommended a body bag from their locker rated for fluid containment and microgravity. The medic and the commander were shaky but methodical. They stowed him, wiped surfaces, swapped out the ventilation intake filters, and taped a plastic skirt around the intake to catch anything clinging to the grill. They pulled the intake cartridge and sealed it. The medic's hands shook when he closed the case on the biological waste container. He breathed through his mouth for a while, the way people do when they have been holding their breath without noticing. We extended the quarantine again. They accepted. We all pretended we would open the hatch after a day and talk face-to-face like normal. I turned off my sleep music after 10 minutes and listened to fans. I thought of a night years ago when a water reclaim unit tripped a breaker and we all woke at once because the air sounded different. You become a connoisseur of fan pitch in orbit. I checked the screen at my bunk that showed the station's carbon dioxide partial pressure. It was climbing slightly because the extra people on the other side of a hatch were still sharing our atmosphere through the vestibule fittings and the small leakage that is the normal state of seals. I ran through options. Nothing new. Everything we did needed minutes, not miracles. At station morning, our station morning, because the sun rose every 90 minutes and time was a convention, our ground flight director came on loop with a voice that tried to be businesslike and could not quite hold it. Ground had lost comm with several centers. We were to preserve propellant, reduce consumables, and prepare for the likelihood that we would be on our own for longer than planned. She did not say a number for days or weeks. She did not need to. She asked us to acknowledge. I said copy. The commander of the station, a pilot who had shepherded more cargo ships than I had hot dinners, said copy in a voice that made my chest feel hollow. We never opened their hatch. The infected man, dead, sealed, did not stay dead. The medic's camera recorded the first movement. The bag shifted. The noise was not a groan or a scream. It was the dry rasp of fabric against fabric and the dull thumps of limbs banging against metal in a place where limbs are too light. The medic said a word I will not repeat. The commander secured himself with a boot under a restraint bar, pulled the bag into a maintenance area, and strapped it down. We watched the shape inside move with a rhythm that made no sense. It fought, even though it had nothing to push against. It thumped until the bag scuffed and a faint mist of something pooled inside the transparent window. We could not smell it. We could see it. We told them not to open the bag. They did not. After that, the visiting vehicle was a laboratory none of us wanted. The medic set up a camera to watch the bag and move the others to the far end. He wiped everything again. He wore a breathing hood and gloves, then added more gloves because redundancy is a reflex. He taped over seams. He tried to isolate the ventilation loop to recirculate on their side alone. He did well. He missed one thing that none of us saw: the fine varnish of moisture that clings, the line of condensation that beads along cable ties and acoustic panel seams. It is invisible until it moves. The next patient showed symptoms 8 hours later. This time there was no vomit cloud, just a slackness followed by a wild-eyed panic. He rammed his shoulder into a panel and then rebounded into another person like a billiard ball. The medic reacted faster, securing him with straps and a bungee across the chest. The man's breathing was fast and shallow, then slow, then gone. I listened to the medic count breaths on open loop. The commander reached for him twice and stopped himself because he knew every touch was a new path. They were brave and careful, and still it was not enough. We sealed our side against the possibility, even the suspicion, that aerosol was crossing. We closed intermodule vents and added our portable scrubbers to thicken the air through more filters. We moved our sleep location so that return vents would draw away from hatchways. I swapped a cabin fan for a quieter one that would not move as much fluid if fluid somehow crossed. It made the air heavier in one corner of the module. We added an extra canister of lithium hydroxide to a duct on a loop that already had zeolite beds, because redundancy feels like a plan when you have fewer real plans. The carbon dioxide number drifted slightly down. It was something to point to. 2 days later, we were no longer neighbors to a quarantine. We were neighbors to a ship we could not save. The commander's voice broke when he asked for permission to undock and depart. His flight computer would not allow it without an explicit link to mission control. Ground was quiet. We could have given him a manual release, but that would have meant opening the vestibule to reach the bolts. The hatch handles were built to be moved by a human hand. The phrase that passed between us was plain: "Do not open the airlock." He laughed once, short. He said he understood. That night, the bagged body stopped moving. The medic taped desiccant packets around the bag window as if drying the air could undo a thing that should not have happened. Another evacuee floated quietly with a fixed stare and then began to pant. The medic cried and kept working. The commander kept count out loud. By morning, their crew was 2, and then 1. The last person alive over there stopped talking. The camera kept sending still frames of a person curled with a strap across their back to keep them from drifting. The ship's battery voltage fell as loads cycled. The heaters dipped. The bag window stayed fogged. The straps creaked now and then. Our station commander taped a square of gray over the hatch window without a word. We did not open that hatch. It did not matter. A week later, I found the pathogen in our own air handling. It was not a dramatic discovery. It was a smear on the cassette of a rack-mounted air filter I was swapping to address a rise in cabin carbon dioxide that should not have been rising. The cassette had a faint tackiness when I pulled it, like syrup, even though airflow in microgravity is engineered to avoid wetting. The biosensor panel we finally coaxed into giving us a result lit orange. We had our own case, then 3. One of our science crew froze in the hatchway between modules, panting, eyes darting. We moved fast. We strapped him in a sleep rack and sealed the curtain around him. He quieted. He went empty. The pathology aboard the visiting vehicle repeated, slowed by our earlier precautions and sped by the shared reality that the station breathes one loop if you give it time. Our commander argued for evacuation in the small Soyuz-style capsule we kept for contingencies. The numbers were ugly. We had 3 aboard on our side when the first one turned, then 2, and then me. The capsule could have held 3 on paper. Launch windows, deorbit timing, and tracking support were theoretical now. Down was not safe in any sense of the word, but he was the commander, and his reflex was to bring people home. He suited up, sealed himself into the descent seat, and waited for me to run the undock sequence from the service module. We had never trained for doing it with one person free. I held to a handrail and floated between panels like someone moving through a submerged basement. The crowding in the comnet was gone. The station's voice was clear and alone. We undocked clean. The capsule drifted back, thrusters spat, and the little ship dropped under us in a slow arc. I wished him a safe trip in the way people do when there is nothing else to say. He told me to follow in the next window if I could get the backup ready. We both pretended the world below would be able to recover him. His track light slid under the station and into the Earth's shadow. I watched it until it was not there. I worked for an hour, maybe 2, to unstrap the reserve vehicle, then stopped. I stared at a condensation bead on a cable tie and thought, this is how it moves. I did not launch the backup. I did not trust the couch. I did not trust the hoses that fed the suit. I did not trust the way the pathogen had clung to a filter cover and to the glove I had peeled off over an absorbent wipe that had not fully absorbed. Instead, I shut down half the station, closed hatches until my world was a corridor, and turned the environmental control and life support system into a boutique. I fed air through 2 parallel scrubbers so I could swap one to bake out while the other worked. I reduced humidity to the lowest safe level so that films could not spread as easily. I turned on every ultraviolet lamp we had for surface sterilization and rotated panels under them like pages under a desk lamp. I did not kid myself. This was not a cure, it was a hedge. I made rules. I kept to one set of handrails and wiped them every time I came through. I kept one laptop for procedures and one for logs and never crossed them. I ate with a straw and clamped the straw with a magnetic clip before I unsealed the pouch. I slept in short shifts in a zipped bag with the hood cinched. An airflow monitor taped to the wall to remind me the fans were still working when I woke unsure. I checked the carbon dioxide number more often than any other number and talked to it under my breath. I measured my oxygen production from electrolysis with a simple calculation in my head to make myself feel occupied. I did not talk to Earth because the relay network was intermittent and because I was not sure who would hear. I lasted through the first week alone. Then the station reminded me I was not alone. I heard a hatch handle click against a stop. The sound is unmistakable if you have moved through enough modules. Metal on metal, rubber on metal, the quiet resonant thud of a big circle of structure seeding into its neighbor. The handle moved a few degrees and then stopped because I had locked it with a pip pin and a strap. I floated very still and listened. The second noise was softer. The brush of a sleeve against a hatch window. I closed my eyes. I opened them. I said, "Identify yourself because procedure is a life raft." No answer. I repeated the call, gave a timestamp like a professional, and waited. I watched the camera feed for that hatch. A figure floated where there had been no figure before. Not a shape that slammed and thrashed like what had pressed at the visiting ship's bag. The motions were minimal, and they were wrong in a different way. Small, searching taps at the hatch seam, a head that bumped and drifted and corrected without a clear push. Their suit was not a hard shell. It was a soft intravehicular garment with a portable breathing hood taped at the neck ring. The hood was clouded. The person inside moved like someone who had been in the dark too long. I did not open. I did not speak for a minute, and then I did, because not speaking became worse. "Do not open the airlock," I said. I said it once, and then I said it again, not for them, but for me. It had become a boundary. It had become the rule that kept the world on either side in place. The figure bumped the window with the soft weight of a helmeted head and drifted back. A hand reached up and pressed against the glass with fingers splayed. The glove was an intravehicular type with gray palms. No suit label. No patch I could read. It could have been someone from the rescue ship who had made it across through a route I had not imagined. A duct, a bypass, a maintenance crawl length you could only navigate if you knew the station the way a plumber knows a house. Or it could have been something else inside a shape that looked like help. I traced how they might have come. The station is not a single pipe, it is a tree of pipes. There are bypasses and crossover ducts for redundancy. There are utility corridors that carry data and fluids around hatches meant for people. There is a vacuum line for payloads that need it. There are cable trays that a determined person could follow like a ceiling crawl space if they were desperate and strong. The infection had already shown it could travel on film and condensation. There was no reason to assume a human host needed a person's decisions to move from one pressure vessel to another. I kept my side sealed. I watched the figure for an hour, then 2. I moved only to take over scraping duty on the carbon dioxide beds. The figure made the same small motions at irregular intervals. It did not pound. It did not call. Once, a hand made a small, precise gesture like someone testing a latch. I do not know if it was cognition or a reflex learned hours before. I taped black foam over the hatch window and hid the camera feed. Hiding it did not change the sound when the handle twitched against the stop. Food was fine for a while because we had stocked for a long mission. Water was a loop as long as I could keep the Sabatier cycling and the filters dry. Urine becomes water becomes coffee in a cycle that is not poetic but is honest. I replaced the valves that like to stick with spares and then cleaned the stickier ones with lint-free swabs and patience. I kept the humidity low. Films still formed on the wrong side of grills, always the wrong side. I replaced filter cassettes and heat-soaked them in a locked cabinet where I had mounted ultraviolet lamps. I checked their surfaces through a small window and had the unwanted thought that the bag on the visiting ship had also looked inert, until it did not. I tried to starve the pathogen of anywhere to sit. I taped over Velcro patches that had become fuzzy with dozens of hooks. I removed soft stowage in favor of hard-zippered pouches I could wipe. I dismantled a laptop to clean its keys with alcohol swabs while a diagnostic ran. I learned where drops hide in a place with no up. They hide under labels. They hide behind handrail brackets. They hide in the shallow well around a screwhead you cannot see without angling a light. Each time I found one, I placed a small piece of green tape next to it on the first day, a yellow tape on the second, a red tape on the third. When the tapes overlapped, I took the panel off and started again. The station, starved for activity beyond my rituals, found small ways to remind me it was alive. A gyroscope hummed a little louder when a rate sensor warmed. A radiator valve snapped as it cycled. The comm panel blinked at intervals that looked like meaning. I did not chase ghosts in the systems. I chased only what I could measure. The carbon dioxide number, the oxygen generation current draw, the humidity percentage, the temperature in the loop that passed by the hatch where the figure floated. Lower there, always a little lower. I mapped the airflow in my head. I saw where air went. I kept the flow away from the hatch seam. I wore a breathing hood when I had to go near any boundary. The hood fogged. I learned to tilt my head to let the film slide off the center of my vision. I learned to hear my own breathing and the faint tap of droplets hitting the inside of the plastic. I wore double gloves and stripped the outer with a peeling motion I practiced until I could do it with my eyes closed in case the hood fogged more. I kept my hair short and my beard shaved because it made the hood seal better. I recorded those details in the log because a record makes rules real. I considered purging with vacuum. On the ground, you open a window to clear a room. In space, that impulse is the opposite of survival. You can only open to vacuum if you are ready to lose the air you require and to accept that anything not bolted down becomes a missile. You also accept that whatever clings inside the ducts may not release in a clean way. There is stiction in films. There are surface tensions that do not behave the way a person expects. I ran the numbers on a controlled depressurization of the compartment next to the hatch. The math said it would take a long time to pull down through the limited cross-section and that the temperature drops would do their own harm. The cautionary note I wrote in the procedure template was simple. Do not do this unless you are ready to leave for good. I had not admitted it yet, but leaving was not on my list. The commander had gone, the others were gone. The station was a house with doors closed and a whisper under one door. It was still my house. I could keep it running. I could keep the lights on over a world that might have none. The relay did pass a few messages through in my third week alone. They were not addressed to me. They were automated pings and a burst of text from a ground unit that did not identify itself beyond a number. It said that coastal regions were unstable and that landing zones were compromised. It used the word unadvised. It did not say no. It said unadvised. On the next pass, a different message crawled through. It was short and specific. Station Aegis, if able, maintain altitude. Avoid debris fields. Do not attempt deorbit without confirmed ground support. It was signed with an identifier that matched a defense network I knew by reputation. I laughed once in a quiet way. They were asking me to keep a city bus in orbit alone and avoid the ghosts of other buses. I could do that as long as the thrusters fired when I asked. I conserved propellant. I pointed the belly towards drag as little as possible. I watched the map on the screen that showed debris warnings like mosquitoes. The figure at the hatch did not leave. Sometimes there were two. The second appeared the way the first had. A sound first, then a smear on the window, then the pale shape of a hood. I stopped thinking in terms of people and started thinking in terms of hosts. The infection had adapted to low gravity in a way I still did not grasp. It had learned to use drift and the station's forced airflow. It had learned that in sealed compartments, things do not rot the way they do in air with weight. The bodies on the visiting ship had continued to move for days with no oxygen support I could measure. The film that clung to filters seemed to stay viable longer than any training suggested. I was living next to a new normal that the textbooks did not cover. I discovered the worst of it when I replaced a water separator in a condensing heat exchanger. The exchanger pulls moisture from cabin air. It is the place where humidity goes to become liquid and re-enter the loop as condensate. The canister I pulled had a meniscus that should not have been there after I ran the drying cycle. It was thick. A droplet detached and held shape too long before it slid. Under a scope, I saw a motion that was not mechanical. I will not describe it. I do not have the training to name it. I only know that it moved in a way that suggested the pathogen did not just survive in films, it preferred them. It had found the one place in our loop that mimicked mucous membranes and held water in suspension. In microgravity, that place was not a lung. It was the station itself. The realization changed my rules. I isolated that heat exchanger and rerouted through a secondary that was never meant to be primary. I dried the first to desert levels and then sealed it in a locker. I taped a skull and crossbones on the door and then removed it because symbols like that are for other people. I wrote "No" in thick marker and drew a box around it. I added a log entry for every time I looked at the door so I would see how often my habits took me there. I did not go back. In the 4th week, something spoke. Not a human voice. A speaker popped and hissed and then made a sound like wind passing a bottle. Then a syllable, clipped and empty of intent, and then another. The pattern was not random. It repeated in a rhythm almost like a checklist read back. I tracked the source to a panel near the hatch where the figure rested. I had disconnected the audio bus on that panel days before because it shared a ground with a camera I did not need. It was not possible for that speaker to be powered. I removed the panel with slow, deliberate motions. Behind it, I found a patch cable rerouted from a different bus, a small bypass someone had installed the day the visiting ship docked to improve camera coverage. It explained the noise. It did not explain the syllables. I recorded a sample and played it back later. It sounded like someone saying my name through a hose. It could have been the station's habit of making signal out of noise. It could have been my brain's habit of the same. I set up a spare environment monitor next to the hatch seam. It sampled air and logged particulates. Once a day, I compared that log to the station average. The hatch number was always a little higher. I adjusted the fan balance again to pull air away from it. The number dropped and then rose again. I added a soft gasket of foam to the seam on my side, a belt and suspender solution. The number stabilized. The handle tapped twice that night and then did not tap again for hours. When I finally spoke to a human voice again, it came through a path nobody had meant for voice. A payload telemetry uplink pinged and then stayed open. A ground operator identified herself with a call sign that matched a European tracking station. She spoke slowly, as if she was not sure if anyone would answer. I did. She cried once, then apologized, then became the professional I needed. She said they had eyes on my orbit and could give me debris updates when their radar cycles left room. She could not promise continuity. I said continuity was a luxury. I asked about the world. She said that cities were unstable, but that there were islands of order. She did not list them. She did not offer me a landing zone. She told me something else instead. A separate platform had reported similar medical events aboard and had attempted vacuum purge with no success. The infection had persisted in their water loop. She said they had concluded that in microgravity, without gravity pulling fluids down and out of tissues, cell decay was slowed in a way that preserved function far past what should be possible. She said it might never end on its own. I said, "Do not open the airlock," without thinking. She gave a short, humorless laugh that I recognized because it was my own. She told me to conserve, to stay healthy, to keep logging. I promised to do what I was already doing. The uplink died 2 minutes later. I needed a longer plan. Aegis was designed to be serviceable. It could be kept alive if a person was stubborn. The infection next door made that into an endurance trial with a bad neighbor that never moved out. I could not outwait it if the woman was right about cell decay. I could not leave without dropping into a world that might not accept a capsule on fire over their horizon. I did have one option that was more than gesture. I could amputate part of the station. Modules are joined by rings and bolts and cables and fluid lines. If I prepared correctly, I could undock the section that held the hatch with the figures and send it away with a push from attitude control thrusters. It would be like breaking off a branch that had gone bad. The procedure existed. It had been written for a different reason: to jettison a damaged segment if it began leaking or if it burned. I printed it on paper because having it on paper on a clipboard made it feel like a job and not a wish. The steps were many and precise. Power down non-essential loads. Close fluid couplings. Vent lines so that nothing sprays when a connector pops. Remove data umbilicals that hated to be removed. Drive bolts with a sequence that spreads stress. Confirm the receiving segment can hold attitude. Confirm the remaining segment can. Confirm again. I read it 5 times. I staged tools. I taped the pistol grip tool's battery to the handle with a second restraint because I could not afford to chase it if it floated. I set a day and a time in station time. I ate a meal that tasted like cardboard even by our standards. I smelled the faint iodine in the water pouch and liked it because at least I could smell anything at all. I did my rules. Wipe, hood, double glove. I moved toward the ring that would be the cut. There are places on the station where distance is a map, where you know you have passed the point of no return because the handrail changes from round to square, or the light fixtures switch color temperature. I moved past 2 such markers and thought, commit. The first bolts backed out with a whine and a click. The tool's torque feedback vibrated into my palm. I caught each washer with a strip of tape on a stick because even a washer is a threat in freefall. I spoke each step aloud so the microphone would record it, so that if I made a mistake it would be a human mistake with a phrase attached. Power loops isolated. Data umbilicals out. Fluid quick disconnects capped. The words calmed me. The handle on the other side of the hatch clicked once as if in comment. I did not look. Halfway through, the station rolled 10 degrees in yaw. Attitude control compensated quickly. The thruster noise was a dry cough through structure. I called it, marked the time, and resumed. The disconnect that worried me most was a coolant line. A droplet formed on the male side as I capped it, held shape, and then merged into the cap with a slow wave that looked like a heartbeat. I put it in a bag and clipped the bag to a tether point. I wiped the glove that had touched the cap with a wipe that I then bagged and clipped. Every motion took twice as long as planned because caution multiplied steps. When the last bolt backed out, the ring no longer felt like part of the same building. A misalignment one cannot see becomes something you can feel through the tool, through your forearm bones, in your teeth. I pushed gently with one hand and felt the module move a millimeter. The figure at the hatch did not react. I backed away and took my station at the control panel. I keyed in the separation command. It waited for confirmations I had already given it. I forced the override. The pyros fired with a sound like a snap close to your ear and then muffled. The ring separated. The module drifted. The figures inside did not care about drift the way we do. They moved with the same small searching taps. The hatch handle moved once in a direction that would never open it again. The module floated out on the guide rails, rotated a degree, and kissed the bumper stops. I fired a short pulse on the maneuvering jets. The module slid clear, rotated end over end very slowly, and fell behind the station like a balloon leaving a child's hand. I watched it until it was small. I did not wave. I logged every number and every step because that is how we stay ourselves. The silence after was a presence. I did not realize how loud the tapping had been until it was gone. The particulate count at the seam dropped in a graceful curve that made me exhale for the first time all the way in days. I ran the environmental loop through the secondary heat exchanger and watched the condensate come off clear. I changed every filter even if they did not need it. I ran the ultraviolet lamps until the timer cycled 3 times. I slept with my hood off for the first time in a week. I woke to a noise I had not heard. Nothing unusual, only normal fans. I lasted another month. I did not grow brave, I grew routine. I taped new checklists to panels that had never had them. I replaced the little propellant transducer that had been flaky and calibrated the fuel gauging by comparing burns to calculated delta V. I adjusted the station's orbit twice to avoid debris one of the tracking stations warned me about on days when they had power. I watched Earth and did not look for lights. I let my eyes rest on the oceans. I spoke to the planet like an old neighbor through a fence. I did not expect an answer. The infection, the thing that had learned to like films and filters and condensers, did not knock anymore because there was no door left for it to knock on. That did not mean it was gone. It had taught me what it was in an environment that made it strong. No gravity to pull fluids down and out. No settling. No decay the way we had counted on. Sealed compartments that preserved what should have been transient. It had learned to ride airflow and to wait. Aegis was now a place where my existence depended on not giving it a chance to relearn me. On a day I designated as a Sunday because I needed one, the telemetry path opened again. A different voice, American this time, told me that a ground team wanted to coordinate an eventual controlled deorbit of the remaining station in a year if I could keep it aloft. They offered resupply through an autonomous cargo vehicle if they could bring one up. They asked if I was alone. I said yes. The line went quiet for a long breath. The voice said, "We read you, Aegis. Maintain current plan. We'll try to get you mass and filters." The word filters felt like an embrace. I am still here now. I do not count days aloud. I log them. I sweep the same handrails. I swap scrubbers. I watch the carbon dioxide number and the humidistat and the tiny drift of the orbit trace. I keep the hatch covers clean and the few windows left uncovered pointed at the dark when I need dark, and at the Earth when I need proof of anything else. I record this in a steady voice because I want whoever finds it to hear that steadiness. If you hear this, and if you ever come up here with plans to investigate what happened on the visiting vehicle or in the module I pushed away, remember what we learned the hard way. Things behave differently without weight. Fluids linger. Filters hold on to what you do not want. Decay takes its time. Do not open the airlock because your hands want to help. Do not open it because a shape on the other side looks human and still. Do not open it because you think vacuum is a cure. It is not. The infection followed us into orbit, adapted to what we built, found a home in our careful loops. It might never die here because the environment we engineered for life is also an environment where things can wait forever. If you come with sealed experiments and a plan to keep the station itself outside your loop. If you cannot do that, then leave it to circle and dim with dignity. Until then, I will keep Aegis breathing. I will keep the lights on when I can, and drift when I must. I will talk to the carbon dioxide number and to the people on the other end of intermittent pings, and I will tape another no on the next tempting door. I am a maintenance technician, and I am doing my job. I am keeping one small room of air clean in a place that does not forgive error, and I am learning how to live with neighbors I cannot allow inside. If you are listening in a quiet room on the ground, look up on a clear night. If you see a slow star cross the sky, that might be me. I will not wave, I will be busy. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.